Sociologist Charles Murray was supposed to speak yesterday at Middlebury College in Vermont, and he would have done so if a mob of protesters hadn't decided to stop him. UC Berkeley is in turmoil tonight, real turmoil, as rioters set fires and forced the cancellation of a speech by writer Milo Yiannopoulos. If you have an idea that doesn't fall within the narrow spectrum of currently popular left-wing views, you can expect harassment, bullying, physical attacks. If you're trying to give a speech, a disruptive protest is almost a certainty. How did this happen? Today was no exception. Sociologist Charles Murray went to Notre Dame today, and a mass of people showed up to get mad.
Dr. Charles Murray is an acclaimed yet controversial social scientist with decades of research in issues like socioeconomics, race, the American culture, and now the 2016 election. But today, Dr. Murray was greeted by protesters here on the campus of Notre Dame because students disagree with some of the conclusions in his book, in which Dr. Murray writes that a person's intelligence depends on a few key factors, including genetics, upbringing, class, and race.
Yeah, I do think he's promoting a racist agenda. One of the definitions of racism is believing that you're superior, that your race is superior to another. And in his book, The Bell Curve, he clearly states that he believes black people are less intelligent than white people. He also says he believes Eastern Asians are more intelligent than white folks.
One particular passage that students seem to be outraged over in one of his books is when Murray writes that little boys who grow up without fathers tend to reach adolescence unprepared for life. Protesters basically say Murray's research is bogus because he's racist, while others say Murray is simply presenting the hard truths from his research.
People on the left, such as those who have gathered here, will take out little snippets of those quotes, little pieces of analysis, and they'll present it as if he's like, some white supremacist or Nazi, just and putting ideas onto him that he didn't actually express. And I think that that's the source of a lot of the controversy around him. Not actually what he believes, but rather what they want him to believe in order to have this kind of gigantic controversy.
Ideology that they're being fed at the moment is flourishing because of the safe space culture and the trigger warning culture, because it can never be interrogated, because it can never be challenged.
The most recent person silenced in this manner is Ann Coulter.
Ms. Coulter's announcement that she intends to come to this campus on April 27th without regard for the fact that we do not have a protectable venue.
Security is the new shut up.
They kept piling on, requirements, ruses. You can't speak in the evening. You have to speak in the daytime when kids are in classes. We're not sure which room you're going to use. We won't tell you to the last minute. You have to exclude everyone except students. And although the intermediaries kept encouraging me to say, this is unfair. They never do this to liberals. I kept saying, nope, I'll do it.
Yeah.
Okay. So I agreed to all of their demands, and then wake up this morning and they send out a letter saying how much they love the First Amendment and freedom of speech, and they're so committed to it. But we're just canceling her anyway.
What they are terrified of, because they can't fight it with facts, is libertarian and conservative points of view.
My view is basically that universities, institutions of higher education should be able to make value judgments about quality of speaker, not ideological tests, not about whether the speaker is not mob rule or popularity contests, but judgments about the quality of the speaker and that speaker's suitability for a speech at an institution of higher education.
Okay, so those are so subjective, those terms, that they allow a college to stop speech they disagree with, which is, of course, exactly what happens. I can't think of an occasion in the life of Colby College, for example, when conservative students have stopped a liberal speaker. It's always the other way around. So what are the criteria? Why is Ann Coulter, for example, who's raising big public policy issues, immigration, why is she not suitable?
Well, a couple of points on this. One is that if you look at, it's a wonderful service by the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education. FIRE provides a database of disinvited speakers or disinvitation attempts. And if you look at that, you'll see that it's actually not always from the left that the disinvitation or no platforming happens. So I want to just correct that. But the thing is, the fact of the matter is...
Can you name a single example where a speaker has been physically prevented from speaking by conservative students?
I know basically that Barack Obama and Alice Walker have been sort of denied, or at least attempted.
No, they were not stopped from speaking. Nobody put their bodyguards in the hospital. Nobody threw rocks against the building or pounded on the windows. Conservative students have not, that I'm aware of, and I would denounce it immediately if they did, stopped any speaker. And yet you see it on the left, and yet your piece doesn't say one word about that. I wonder why.
the conflict is not just left-wing radicals being violent, it's also right-wing radicals putting on body armor and coming there for a fight as well.
Okay, but the right-wingers, to the extent they exist, are not the ones who stopped a series of speakers from speaking. They were 100% on the left. And you don't mention that in your piece, and you don't suggest any punishment for those people. If you're a near free speech absolutist, as you claim you are, what should happen to people who prevent someone from expressing his or her political views? Should they be expelled?
I'm not really in the. It's not my interest in adjudicating punishment to these people.
Why not?
In other words, because it's not my role.
The obligation of any authority right now is to say Ann Coulter can speak, and we will protect her. That's why you pay your taxes. That's why we have a police, and we are not going to allow a gang of thugs, really fascist gangs. This is how it started in Europe in the 20s and the 30s. Fascist gangs would literally intimidate their opponents to the point where they became dominant. I don't think they're going to take over. This is not Mussolini. But nonetheless, it is very disturbing that in America, somebody cannot speak because there are thugs who threaten violence.
Time now for campus craziness, and in that category, no school comes close to matching Evergreen College in Washington State. You've been in a coma for the last month. Here are the basics. Student activists sought to kick all white people off campus for an entire day. Brett Weinstein, who's a biology professor there and a self-described progressive, refused to leave. He said that was wrong. He was subsequently harassed by a mob howling for his job. Instead of sticking up for their colleague, meanwhile, dozens of Evergreen professors have called for Weinstein to leave, calling him the villain, demanding he be investigated.
The protest of my class occurred because I sent an email to the staff and faculty email list protesting what we call day of absence. In this case, day of absence was being reversed by the organizing committee, and white people were asked to leave the campus. It was not that we were forced to leave, but we were asked to leave, and it was made very clear that leaving was an act of allyship with people of color, and therefore not leaving, if you were white, meant that you were not an ally.
And you refused to leave.
I did refuse to leave, and I sent a letter. I think it was very carefully stated, but it said that there was a tremendous difference between a population absenting themselves from a shared space and a population deciding to absent other people from that same space. And that on a college campus, people should be equally free to be on campus irrespective of their skin color.
People are self-identifying into tribes.
What they will not tolerate is diversity of opinion.
Hate speech is speech that comes out of the rhetoric that targets certain groups or individuals because of who they are or their social location in society. We know that people like to espouse white nationalist and white supremacist views at campuses around the country.
There is no offensiveness exception to the First Amendment.
Traditionally, colleges have been a place where people can say what they think, even if other people disagree. What's new, and I'm old enough to remember it, is that now students like you are saying, no, you're not allowed to express those views here.
Yes,
that's a new thing.
Yes, it is. It is a new thing, and it's because we are now at a space in society where we're concerned for the safety of people, right? And so we have a change in society where we are no longer allowing groups of people to be targeted and come under the harm that
how many, just at Denison, I've been to Denison in Granville, Ohio. How many students have been killed by white supremacists on your campus recently?
No, nobody's been killed by white supremacy, but I'm sure that there are a lot of people living under the stress of white supremacy. So it's about enabling people to carry out microaggressions, rather that be the use of, the N-word, the use of different speech. And we're not just talking about
but what about, hold on, when you watch television and you see, like in Berkeley, people with black handkerchiefs over their faces hitting other people with chair legs or spraying them with bear spray. That's actual violence, I think you'd agree. And they're on the left. Does that kind of challenge the storyline?
And the violence that's occurred from the left has been entirely reactionary to the white nationalist violence that has come from groups like the KKK and come from white nationalists.
We're
because white nationalists are completely invested in violence.
We looked at the top 50 diversity officials at the top 50 schools in America, we found on average, the average diversity officer, which is basically a PC police in other terms, is making $175,000 a year. The highest one making over $300,000 a year at UVA here in our state of in Charlottesville. And we found that average salary, $175,000, that's 3 times the pay of the average police officer in America. And for everyone wondering why are colleges so expensive these days, it's because we're hiring all these administrators.
A demoralizing new study finds that a majority of America's young people oppose the First Amendment.
I think one hypothesis is that students don't truly appreciate what the First Amendment is, and that part of the First Amendment isn't a right not to be offended.
Hundreds of colleges around this country have policies encouraging students to report any offensive speech or other crime think they overhear from their classmates. Once such thought crime is reported, squads with Orwellian names like Bias Incident Response Team swoop in and impose all manner of penalties. These range from sensitivity training to suspension.
Not only is it real, it's really horrifyingly widespread. We found more than 230 of these teams in our searches across campuses nationwide, and we're sure there's more that we haven't identified. The ones we found, though, cover and they monitor the speech of 2.84 million students. These are all going into a big database, generally controlled by the government. 42% of these bias response teams include police departments. And so, for instance, at Dartmouth, if you go to their bias response form and you can anonymously put something in, that goes straight to the judicial affairs folks and the police.
Donors should not contribute to schools, and even my school, if they won't comply with basic notions of due process and fundamental fairness.
Talking heads regularly complain about how dumb the American population is. Untrue. But if it were the case, you could thank the media for it, at least some of the spread of dumbness. Consider Kamau Bell, host of CNN's documentary series United Shades of America. Quote, "If your free speech leads to hate speech and it makes people feel unsafe, then universities have the right to protect the kids on campus. That's not about free speech, it's about safety." Actually, Bell is completely wrong. Supreme Court precedents are very clear on the scope of free speech in this country. First of all, there is no hate speech exemption to free speech. Sorry, kids, there isn't, and it never has existed. In Snyder versus Phelps, the court made it clear that public speech can never be punished simply for being offensive. In Legal Services Corp versus Velasquez and many other cases, the court has ruled that government entities cannot treat speakers differently simply because of their viewpoints. So if Berkeley is willing to host left-wing speakers without any problems, then it must allow conservative speakers as well, regardless of what threats are made by violent agitators against those speakers. This is completely unambiguous. It is not a matter of opinion. It is settled law. It is precedent set by the Supreme Court again and again. But instead of teaching these facts, outlets like CNN are foisting a false storyline on the public and endangering, ironically, the very rights they owe their existence to, and they ought to stop.
The one thing that used to unite left and right, even in the bitterest times in the 50s, McCarthyism, people would say things like liberals would say, I don't support anything you say, but I'll defend your right to say it. If you can't have the government guaranteeing the safety of speakers, then we have lost one of the fundamental uniting elements of our society. If there's anything that unites us, it's believe in the First Amendment, believe in free speech. Whenever you talk about America, what makes us unique, we believe in liberty. It begins with religious liberty, and it also begins with free speech. If we can't get agreement on those principles, then we really are in a dangerous situation. It is, I think, a manifestation of decadence, of a civilization that doesn't have enough confidence in its own righteousness in the end. For all of our flaws, if you don't have that kind of civilizational consciousness, you're finished.